Okay, so in this second Maple Hints presentation, so to speak, I want to go over a couple of things I forgot to mention in the first clip to keep in mind for those of you who are complete beginners in Maple. One thing you have to keep in mind is that Maple likes by default to provide exact answers. In other words, if for example, non-integers, if they are rational numbers, then you will see basically a fraction, even though it's very large in some cases, which may not be so helpful. So, for example, let's say you want to compute 3 to the power 20, which is a big number, divided by, let's say, 4 to the power 5. So, you see, you get a number there. In fact, let's actually make it even less, even more confusing, so to speak, for our purposes. Let's say 4 to the 7 is at the bottom, or even 4 to the 8. So it may not be helpful because you may want to know what's the integer part of this number, what's the whole part. I mean, approximately how much is this 3, 4, 8, 6, 7, and so on divided by 65,536, whatever, right? I mean, we don't have an idea. So obviously, one thing to do is to approximate this, and which brings me actually to another thing to keep in mind that I want to mention. In the newest version of Maple, the right click is much more limited than before. So basically the contextual menu is on the right hand side. So whenever you are tempted in Maple to right click on an object in order to find some options, some commands that you want to do, like approximate, like plot for a function and so on, give up that temptation, so to speak, because the option may not be listed on the right click. Rather highlight the math object and look at the right panel, and that's the contextual menu. So the contextual menu will be on the right side of the screen once you highlight the object that you want to manipulate. So in this case, of course, as I said, I want to approximate. You click approximate, and then these are the number of decimals that you want to choose for your approximation. Let's say I choose 10, so therefore the number gives me, you will see the approximation up to 10 digits. A much faster way to do it is to force the decimal representation in the operation, even though the number or the entry is a whole number. So for example, I have 3 to the power 20. I'm going to write 3 to the power 20.0. So I'm going to force one of the entries to be in the decimal form, and this should force Maple to compute everything in decimal form. Another thing I want to mention also as a little quirk, when you write down in the worksheet several powers or other operators like this that require you to move from the main line to the upper line or the index line, right? By upper line, I mean the exponent. You got to be careful here. For example, if I want to compute 3 to the power 2, and then the answer of this times 2, which would be 18, right? So 9 times 2. If you continue typing times 2, notice that that extra 2 is on the exponent, right? So then it's 81 because it's 3 to the 4. So make use of the right arrow when you want to move away from the exponent. So for example, 3 to the power 2, I want this answer, 3 to the power 2, to be multiplied, the whole thing, by 2. I'm going to hit the right arrow. You won't see this, but the effect of the right arrow is that if you pay close attention, the cursor gets bigger, right? So I move the cursor next to the right position, and then I hit times 2, and of course now it's 9 times 2, which is 18. Yet another thing to keep in mind when you plot functions. So I entered already here a function x squared times x minus 1 times x minus 4. This one has, if you look carefully, has 3 roots, right? It will intersect the x-axis in 3 points, 0, 1, and 4. When you plot functions in Maple, you will see that the range for the axis, for the coordinates that Maple chooses, it may not be helpful to you depending on your purpose. So I'm going to highlight this function and choose 2D plots. So you see, by default, if you look at this and you don't pay any attention, you will say, well, yeah, this looks like parabola, more or less, right? It doesn't look like it's crossing the x-axis more than in zero. Well, I mean, it does look like it's close to the x-axis, but you definitely don't see with the naked eye that you have actually exactly 3 roots. And the reason is because by default, Maple will choose a viewing box in which it tries to essentially give you the biggest picture overall of how the function looks like. So the problem with this is that if the function increases quite quickly at the extreme points of the domain, so if x is 10 or minus 10, that's actually a huge number, 15,000. I mean, that's close to 15,000, right, on the left side here. Then it'll try to fit as much graph as possible in this viewing box, which means that what happens near the x-axis is shrunk and you won't be able to see it with the naked eye. So you have to basically predict this and work with the ranges so that you see the behavior you want to see. So if I want to see exactly how the function crosses the x-axis, obviously I'll have to modify the range of the y-axis so I can get closer to what I see around the x-axis. So when you do that, you click the graph, your right-hand side for the contextual menu, click axis and properties, and again you want to give a much smaller range for the vertical axis. So you're going to unclick the use data extends, and now you can enter your own range. Let's say I want minus 10, 10. Hit apply and see if you like it. You already see the 3 roots. Maybe you want to put minus 20, so I can see the part here that it's cropped. And so this is how the function looks like actually near the x-axis. So now you can see clearly that the roots are 0, 1, and 4. So don't just be happy what you see once you click plot. You may have to actually play around with the horizontal and the vertical ranges for any graph that you plot with Maple. Many of these, by the way, can be done in a much more efficient way if you hit directly, I mean, if you enter the plot command, but most of you probably won't do that. You will just use the contextual menu when you go over the task. All right, so I think that's it for this part. See you later.